I gotta say, ladies and gents, after watching the Lord of the Rings March of the Moosebacks trailer, I can't wait for this show to be cancelled after season 1. This trash will be the most expensive failure in TV history. And nothing makes me more erect. Actually, that's a lie. Jeff Bezos' wife giving me dome last week was very titillizing to say the least. But that's besides the point. Hit the like button and subscribe, because if you're tired of seeing the things you enjoy being dragged through the mud of political ideologies and agendas, then this channel is the place to be. Stop being a little and hit that little red button. Now, after watching this trailer, I could see Gandalf on the bridge signifying and representing every Lord of the Rings fan by bellowing, "You shall not pass." And when you start to think about it, Gandalf is the OG gatekeeper. That's why it's absolutely essential to gatekeep your hobbies. Otherwise, weirdos like Amazon will try and corrupt it simply because they can. And newsflash, one does not simply defile Tolkien's mythology. There was an interview with Peter Jackson, the director of the Lord of the Rings movies back in 2002, where he said, and I quote, "We had no interest in putting our messages in this movie, but we thought we should honor Tolkien by putting his messages into it." End quote. I can't think of a better statement than that. Meanwhile, in the Soy Castle, Jeff Bezos cares more about authenticity of the Lord of the Rings as much as he cares about one of his workers languishing in an Amazon dungeon, trying to package 1,000 boxes in under an hour, in 65 degrees Celsius heat, all the while soaked in their own piss and shit. What the f*** does Amazon know about respecting anything anyway? I love how their excuse for diversifying an already beloved IP is to make it for everyone. But then they'll turn around and call their critics every phobe and ist you can think of. All the while saying, "This isn't for you. We don't want or need your kind of viewership." Which one is it, you dingleberry? You can't have it both ways, you greasy dweeb. Anyway, let's get to the topic. You know it's hard to get disappointed when you're not expecting anything, but yet they somehow manage to do it. Watching the trailer is like asking for a specific haircut, and then the barber completely butchers it and then sets you on fire. This thing already has 40,000 dislikes, but yeah, it's clearly just a fringe minority of the fans, guys. Show of hands, everyone, of those who are in the least bit surprised. Let's make a generic fantasy and slap Lord of the Rings in the name so people will love it. Wow. I can't believe you got that level of backlash. Here's a pro tip. Don't give the greatest work of fantasy literature to a bunch of failed gender studies majors who would have problems reading a blank sticky note. I mean, how dare you imagine the levels of arrogance and narcissism it must take for you to think you can do it better than Tolkien himself. You know, it actually makes me think, how did the Tolkien estate even allow this? If the Tolkien estate turns a blind eye to this, then they're all hypocrites, because they did nothing but complain all the time about Peter Jackson's adaptations. But with this travesty, this abomination, they're like, la-di-da, we don't even care. That's nice, isn't it? These charlatans are trying to butcher Tolkien's wonderfully crafted work in order to promote their own agenda. That is disgusting to me, and how that isn't disgusting to the Tolkien estate, I sure do not know. But I do know that up until Christopher Tolkien's death in 2020, Amazon even had Tolkien scholars on board. But as soon as Christopher died, they fired everyone, like they were dead weight or something, and the scholars were forced off the project because, in their own words, they seemingly had no longer any input on the final product. The sad irony of a literary love letter to a simpler pre-modern life getting getting muddled up with a bunch of post-modernist crap is genuinely heartbreaking. Anyway, to me, the way they decided to do the Rings of Power prequel actually makes sense to me, because we get to see how everything fell apart. And of course, it was during a time when Middle-earth was plagued by the blight that is wokeness, and thus the actual Lord of the Rings trilogy is when we get to see the recovery from such filth. A palate cleanser, so to speak. I don't know where to start with the trailer. The most ridiculous thing about it is that for $1 billion, it looks like a PS3 CGI cutscene, just bland, high contrast, oversaturated garbage. And it gets way worse from there, boys. Oh yes, especially the action adventure aspects. The characters have absolutely zero weight to them. Like that silly ice climb jump, that dagger she's carrying weighs more than she does. So everything looks fake and cheap to me, but it's indicative of their efforts. I actually recoil in laughter and find it funny that CGI from the early 2000s looks more realistic and better than what 2022 Amazon can out. The elves don't feel like elves. The dwarf princess doesn't even feel like a dwarf at all. There's random funny weird antler characters. Who on earth looked at Lord of the Rings and thought, you know what we need? Moose men. Yeah, this needs more moose men. Oh, this it gives me a headache. If only Tolkien had given us enough characters. It's almost like they wouldn't have to make new ones for the series. Wow, what an earth-shattering concept in a time period of the lore where there is literally dozens of actual book characters to choose from to put on screen. They made up 3 brand new characters that nobody cares about just so they can have love interests. They lazily added diversity that makes no sense given the lore. That is why people are mad, along with the trailer looking like dumpster juice. It has nothing to do with race. There are plenty of opportunities to add ethnic talent without breaking the law. I mean, you could have hired one Tolkien expert that could have given you many easy ways to have a diverse cast that you so deeply want. There are ways to fit the source material and themes if you do it properly, of course. See, the thing is, Tolkien was such a visionary that he built a world that is more diverse than the world that we live in and wrote strengths and flaws into all people. And one of my other concerns is that the removal of what Tolkien's works were all about. They were all about hope. Sure, the battles and the sword fights and adventuring is fun, but the core theme, the message, is about hope in a dark time. Hope in those you love, hope that there's a better tomorrow, you name it. Tolkien, if you don't know, was a veteran of World War I. He saw horrors that no man should ever witness, and yet he still believed in hope. He still believed in something greater than himself, and he tried to put that belief in his work. Amazon doesn't understand that. Those journalists, those SJWs on Twitter don't understand that. And I mean, how can they when all they care about is money and clout? How would they know anything about deep moral principles like self-sacrifice? That is just some of the stuff Tolkien introduced that all makes sense within the world he created. For example, Frodo chose not to judge Gollum, who made choices he didn't agree with. Instead, he approached him with a kind attitude of understanding to see if he could maybe help him. Or how about Orlando Bloom and Gimli? I mean, hell, they had a whole freaking 3-book long story arc on brotherhood transcending racial divides. No, Tolkien did not stuff ethnic Tolkien characters in the world of Middle-earth to make a political point of our reality. It is a fantasy story after all. Instead, he had hobbits, elves, dwarves, and humans, with each even having their own multiple different ethnicities, cultures, languages, personalities, and histories within them, all living on the same earth, trying to understand each other. People who could choose to do either good or evil no matter who they were. And on that bombshell, Mannix out.